The door opened with a deep vibrating sound, like the air itself was being torn apart. It wasn't just noise. It was a presence. A force that made my skull ache, as if something was clawing inside my mind. Beyond the doorway, there was nothing. Not darkness. Nothing. A void. An absence of existence. But something was inside it. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. And worse. It saw me. The pressure in the room intensified. The walls, the floor, they pulsed faster, like a giant heart on the verge of bursting. The very air trembled. The ground beneath me cracked. I wanted to run. I needed to run. But my body wouldn't move. Then I saw it. Something vast and shapeless stirred inside the void. It had no form. And yet, it was everything. I shouldn't have been able to comprehend it. But it made sure I did. Because it knew me. And worse. It spoke my name. You came too late. The voice didn't come from one place. It came from everywhere. And in that instant, I understood. The thing that had chased me through the tunnels, the creature I had feared, wasn't my enemy. It was a guardian. Its purpose wasn't to hunt me. It was to keep me from reaching this place. And now, I had set something free. The void expanded. The chamber around me began to collapse. The corpses along the walls disintegrated into dust, pulled into the nothingness beyond the door. And I felt my body being pulled too. The ground vanished beneath me. Gravity ceased to exist. My skin burned without fire. My bones vibrated with soundless screams. I wasn't just dying. I was being erased. And then, in the final moment, I saw. The city collapsed into ruins. The sky was colorless. The streets were empty. And in the shadows of the crumbling buildings, they were there. Figures, standing motionless. Watching. Waiting. Not just one. Thousands. And all of them had been freed. I should have disappeared. I should have been erased along with everything else. But I wasn't. When I woke up, I was back. Lying on the wet asphalt of an empty street. The air was thick, metallic, unnatural. The city was silent. Not just quiet, wrong. I pushed myself up, my body aching. My clothes were damp with dirt, dust, and something older. Something that didn't belong here. But as I looked around, this wasn't the city I knew. The streets were there, but they weren't right. The streetlights flickered, but without making a sound. No wind. No distant hum of traffic. No insects. No life. I turned, my stomach twisting. The buildings looked normal, but they weren't. Their windows were all black. Not dark, black. The signs on the stores were blank. Their words melted into unreadable smears. And then I saw them. Standing still. Spread throughout the city. Tall, thin silhouettes. Lifeless. Faceless. Motionless. Just like the thing that had chased me in the tunnels. But now, they were everywhere. On sidewalks. In doorways. Lining the streets. Watching. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My heart pounded, but there was no echo. My footsteps made no sound. The fear creeping through my spine wasn't just panic. It was realization. The city was wrong. I ran. Through the twisting, empty streets, searching for anything familiar. But the city shifted around me. Buildings changed places. Streets stretched too far. Doors led to impossible spaces. And worst of all, I never passed the same place twice. Every time I turned a corner, the city rearranged itself. I wasn't in Redwood Hollow. I was somewhere that looked like it. And then, the final truth hit me. I never should have found those tunnels. They weren't built to be explored. They were built to hide something. To seal it away. And I had opened them. Now, there was nothing between it and the world. I gasped, my chest tightening. Then, for the first time, they moved. Slowly. Together. As if all of them had awakened at once. Their heads turned toward me. And they began to walk. That was the moment the end began. And it was my fault. That inscription paralyzed me. He who crosses this threshold shall never see the sun again. The words didn't just sit on the wall. They echoed inside my skull, as if spoken directly into my mind. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, to pretend I had never seen this place. But then I noticed something that made me hesitate. Footprints. Faint, almost erased by time, but undeniably human. Someone had been here before me. And more than that, they had gone deeper inside. Had they made it back out? That single question became a nightmare looping in my brain. If someone had entered, that meant there was a way out. Or maybe they were still inside. I inhaled sharply and stepped through the threshold. The moment I crossed, something changed. The air thickened. A crushing pressure settled over my shoulders, as if the atmosphere itself was rejecting my presence. My flashlight's beam struggled against the unnatural darkness ahead. It was like the very shadows were swallowing the light. The passage narrowed, forcing me to crouch as I continued forward. The smell became unbearable. A combination of damp stone, rot, and something else. Something metallic. It was the scent of old blood. And then, the sounds began. Dripping, scratching, and breathing. Slow, uneven, close. I stopped. Every hair on my body stood on end. That wasn't my breathing. Something else was in there. I moved forward cautiously, every muscle in my body screaming for me to turn back. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller this time. But this wasn't like the previous one. This one felt personal. It was a cell. Rusty chains hung from the walls, some still locked in place. The stone was scratched deeply, as if someone had clawed at it with bare hands. A shudder ran through me. Someone had been trapped here. But worse than that, something had been trying to get in. The realization hit like ice in my veins. The scratches on the inside of the cell weren't just from someone trying to escape. They were from something outside, trying to get in. My stomach turned. Then I heard it. A sound behind me. Something had moved. I spun my flashlight toward the passage I had come through. Nothing. But the air had changed. It was thicker, denser, and the feeling that I was being watched was stronger than ever. Then the worst part. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the tunnel I had just walked through. My flashlight shook in my grip. I knew I had heard nothing behind me before. But now, something was there. The footsteps continued. Slow, heavy, precise. As if whoever or whatever was back there knew exactly where I was. My flashlight trembled in my hand, casting frantic shadows across the stone walls. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but I couldn't. My throat was dry, my breath shallow. The only thing I could do was stand still and listen. The sound wasn't human. I knew that. It was irregular, sometimes dragging, sometimes sharp, like something scraping against the stone. It was methodical, like it had done this before. A terrible realization struck me. It was following me. I felt a cold wave of panic rising through my chest. I had to get out. I turned and ran. Blindly, without thinking. My boots pounded against the damp ground, each step echoing through the endless tunnel. The footsteps behind me quickened. My stomach twisted. It was chasing me. I didn't want to look back. I couldn't. But some sick part of my brain forced me to. I turned my flashlight for just an instant. And I saw it. A tall, emaciated figure, its limbs too long, its spine curved unnaturally. Its skin was stretched thin over sharp bones, gray and sickly. But the worst part, its mouth. It was open too wide. Far too wide. There were no teeth. Just something writhing inside, something moving, something looking back at me. I froze. Half a second of hesitation. Half a second too long. The thing lunged. I killed the flashlight and ran. The tunnel warped around me, twisting, turning, stretching in impossible ways. The air was wet and thick, clogging my lungs as I sprinted through the endless dark. I could hear it. It wasn't breathing. It wasn't making any noise at all, except for the footsteps. And then, a break in the darkness. Ahead of me, the tunnel opened into a new space. A stairway. Stone steps. Ancient, crumbling, leading up. I didn't question it. I just ran for them. Behind me, the thing didn't stop. I forced my legs forward, climbing 2 steps at a time, ignoring the fire in my muscles. The creature was gaining, but the stairs were too long. Far too long. It felt like I had been climbing forever. Was I actually going up? Was I moving at all? And then, a light. A dim, flickering glow seeping through a narrow crack between the stones. A way out. I threw myself toward it. The stones gave way with a loud crack, and I fell forward, out of the tunnel, onto damp earth. I gasped for air, rolling onto my back, staring into the opening I had just escaped from. Nothing followed me. The tunnel remained dark. And that's when I realized. The thing inside there. It never left the tunnels. It never could. But I had made a mistake. Because now, it no longer needed to. The air around me felt wrong. Thick. Heavy. Damp. Like something was breathing right against my skin. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it. My instincts were screaming at me to run. But where? I couldn't see a damn thing. My flashlight was dead. My fingers trembled as I pressed the button over and over again. Nothing. And then, a sound. Something clicked against the ground behind me. Not a normal footstep. Something sharper. Like claws. Or bone. I swallowed hard. I wanted to believe it was my imagination. But it wasn't. And then I heard it. A whisper. Slow, wet, gurgling. Like a mouth tube broken to form words properly. You shouldn't be here. My brain shut down. My body reacted before I could think. I ran. I ran blindly through the pitch-black tunnel, stumbling over old rails, slamming into walls. The sound behind me grew louder. But it wasn't just footsteps anymore. There was something else. A low, static-like hissing, like dozens of voices speaking all at once but making no sound. The tunnel narrowed. My hands scraped against the walls as I felt my way forward, looking for an exit. Any exit. Then my foot slipped. The ground vanished beneath me. I fell. I reached for something, anything to grab onto, but there was nothing but empty air. I crashed into the ground. But there was no pain. Because I hadn't landed on stone. I had landed on something soft. Something alive. I gasped, my hands pressing against the ground beneath me. It moved. The floor was warm, damp, pulsing. I wasn't standing on stone anymore. I was standing on flesh. A faint, unnatural glow pulsed from the walls ahead, illuminating the space around me. And that's when I realized. I wasn't in a tunnel anymore. This was something else. Something far older. The walls weren't stone. They were veined, throbbing like the insides of something enormous. And scattered all around me. Corpses. Not skeletons. Not normal human remains. These bodies were mummified, twisted into impossible shapes, their faces frozen in expressions of pure terror. Some were half merged with the walls, as if they had been absorbed by the structure itself. And in the center of it all, a door. Not just any door. A colossal archway, black and featureless, covered in symbols that pulsed faintly, as if waiting. And the second my eyes landed on it, it began to open. Working in storm drainage isn't exactly what you'd call exciting. The routine is always the same. Go down into the tunnels, deal with blockages, check old structures, and occasionally find something unusual, a lost object, a trapped animal, a suspicious crack. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I discovered that night. The city was already asleep when I went down to fix what seemed like an ordinary blockage. The smell of damp earth and stagnant water filled the air, as always. But as I cleared away a thick layer of debris, I noticed something strange, a hole in the concrete, a tunnel that wasn't supposed to be there. What made me hesitate wasn't just the fact that the tunnel wasn't on the city's blueprints, though that was bizarre enough. The real problem was its structure. Unlike standard drainage tunnels, built with reinforced concrete and maintained by the city, this one was something else entirely. It was old. Ancient. The walls were made of dark, weathered stone, and strange symbols were carved into them, symbols I didn't immediately recognize. The first thought that crossed my mind was, who built this? And more importantly, why? The idea that I might be about to uncover something no one was meant to find hit me like a shockwave. But curiosity won. Before stepping in, I tested the tunnel stability. I switched on my flashlight and tossed a small chunk of concrete forward, waiting for any reaction. No sound but the deep echo bouncing off the walls. The tunnel stretched on longer than it should have, and the air smelled off. A mix of mold and something else. Something rotten. The feeling that I wasn't alone settled deep in my gut. But what could be in there? Rats? A homeless person? Or something that was never supposed to be disturbed? The decision to step into that tunnel wasn't easy. Everything in me screamed that it wasn't safe. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and at that moment, it was stronger than my common sense. I took the first step inside and felt the ground shift slightly under my weight, as if no one had walked there in ages. My flashlight flickered in my trembling hand, casting distorted shadows along the walls. Every step I took felt like I was being pulled deeper into something that didn't want to be found. The smell of dampness grew stronger, mixed with a metallic scent that turned my stomach. This wasn't just an abandoned tunnel. This was a place that had been hidden on purpose. As I moved forward, I noticed that the walls were wrong. Not just old, worn down in an unnatural way. Like many hands had brushed against them over the years. But whose hands? Or what's? Some sections had been smoothed down completely, while others had deep scratches, as if something had tried to claw its way out. That's when I saw something even more disturbing: human fingernail marks embedded in the stone. That was the first real moment of fear. Who had been down here, scraping at the walls as if trying to escape? My body stiffened, every instinct telling me to turn back. But before I could decide, a cold gust of air brushed past me, coming from deep inside the tunnel. And with it, a sound, a faint whisper barely audible, carried by the echo. My flashlight flickered again, and I knew without a doubt I was not alone anymore. That whisper froze me in place. It hadn't come from my mind. It had come from deep within the tunnel. I turned my flashlight toward the direction of the sound, but the beam seemed weaker now, barely pushing back the thick darkness. The tunnel stretched ahead, but no matter how far I walked, the exit behind me never seemed to get closer. A creeping realization sank in. The tunnel was shifting. I spun around, expecting to see the way I had come, but it was gone. The entrance was no longer there. Only darkness remained. My chest tightened. If curiosity had brought me here, fear was keeping me trapped. Then I saw it. A silhouette standing at the far end of the tunnel. Tall, still, motionless, watching me. I blinked. My flashlight flickered, and it was gone. My heart pounded. Had it ever been there? There was no turning back. The tunnel had taken away my exit. I had no choice but to move forward. With every step, the smell grew worse, a mix of decay and something ancient, something wrong. The walls, which had seemed rough and weathered before, now looked like they were breathing. And then, I entered a larger chamber. My flashlight revealed a stone table at the center, covered in moving symbols. Not carved, alive. Slithering like worms under the surface of the rock. Surrounding the table were skulls. Dozens of human skulls, some shattered, some cracked open as if something had burst from inside them. And in the back of the chamber, a doorway. An archway carved from the same cursed stone, leading deeper. And above it, an inscription. I didn't recognize the language, yet I understood it. He who crosses this threshold shall never see the sun again. The words burned into my mind as if whispered directly into my skull. And in that moment, I realized something. I should have never found this place.